I woke up one morning, poured myself some coffee, stepped out onto my porch, and realized I couldn't leave my own land. No storm, no fallen tree, no washed-out road, just a wall. 8 feet tall, fresh red brick, stretching clean across the only driveway connecting my place to the outside world like it had been there forever, like I was the one trespassing on my own property. For a second, I just stood there, mug in hand, staring at it, waiting for my brain to catch up with my eyes, because nothing about it made sense. There was a sign bolted right into the mortar, crisp white with black lettering, the kind that tries real hard to look official. Private wall installation approved by Cedar Hollow Estates, HOA. I remember reading it twice, maybe 3 times, like somehow the words might rearrange themselves into something less ridiculous, but they didn't. And the thing is, I wasn't part of any HOA. Never had been, never planned to be. My land sat just outside their neat little borders, 10 acres of dirt, grass, and history that had been in my family long before Cedar Hollow showed up with their paved lanes and matching mailboxes. My place doesn't look like much if you're the kind of person who values symmetry and stone veneers. Gravel driveway, a faded red barn leaning just a little more every year, and an old Ford pickup that rattles on cold starts but still gets the job done. Same truck my uncle drove before me. That land, it wasn't just land. It was where I learned how to fix a busted fence with nothing but scrap wire and stubbornness, where I buried my first dog under that crooked oak tree out back, where my uncle taught me that if something's yours, you don't let people push you off it just because they've got nicer shoes. And Cedar Hollow, well, they'd been trying to push me off it for years. At first, they came in polite. A guy in khakis and a tucked-in polo showed up one afternoon, introduced himself as part of the development team, said they were expanding the community footprint, and wanted to make me a very competitive offer. I told him I wasn't selling. He smiled like he'd expected that, handed me his card, said to think it over. I didn't. Then came the letters. Official-looking envelopes talking about property values, neighborhood cohesion, mutual benefit. They started dropping numbers that probably would have made sense to someone else. But to me, it felt like putting a price tag on memories that didn't belong to anyone but me. After that, things got less polite. I started getting visits from the HOA board itself. Different faces, same tone. One of them, a man named Harold Whitaker, always did most of the talking. Tall, silver hair, the kind of guy who never loosened his tie even in the middle of summer. He stood at the edge of my driveway like he didn't want his shoes touching the gravel, looking past me more than at me. "You have to understand," he said once, hands clasped like he was delivering a sermon. "Your property, it disrupts the visual continuity of the neighborhood." I remember leaning against my truck, wiping grease off my hands with an old rag, just listening to him talk about my home like it was some kind of stain. "You mean it doesn't match your houses?" I said. He gave a tight smile. "That's one way to put it. And that bothers you enough to keep showing up here? It affects everyone's investment." That word investment. That's when I realized we weren't even speaking the same language. To him, this was numbers. To me, it was everything. They escalated after that. Complaints to the county about noise, about zoning, about things that had never been an issue before Cedar Hollow even existed. Nothing ever stuck, but it was like getting pecked at by a flock of birds, annoying, constant, meant to wear you down. And when none of that worked, they built the wall. I walked closer to it that morning, boots crunching on the gravel, running my hand along the brick like I was checking if it was real. Solid, freshly laid, still smelling faintly of mortar. This wasn't some overnight prank. This took time, effort, money, which meant they didn't just think they could get away with it, they were sure of it. I pulled out my phone and called the county first. Got bounced around, transferred twice, ended up talking to someone who sounded just as confused as I felt. No permits on record. No approved construction on my property line. That didn't surprise me, but it confirmed what I already knew. Then I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Collins showed up about 40 minutes later, dust kicking up behind his cruiser as he rolled in. He stepped out, took one look at the wall, then looked at me like he was trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. "Morning, Jack," he said, tipping his hat back slightly. "You expecting this?" "Not unless I started building in my sleep," I said. He walked the length of the wall, hands on his hips, boots scuffing the dirt, then stopped at the sign and read it out loud under his breath. I could see the moment it clicked for him, the same mix of disbelief and irritation I'd felt earlier. They with that new development up the road? He asked. Cedar Hollow, I said. Yeah. He let out a low whistle. Bold move. That's one word for it. We stood there for a second, both looking at the wall like it might explain itself if we stared long enough. Then he turned back to me. You want us to get a crew out here, tear it down? He asked. I mean, if it's on your property, they don't have a leg to stand on. And that's the moment something shifted for me. Because yeah, I could have had it knocked down right then. Clean, simple, done. But as I stood there, looking at that wall they built without asking, without warning, like they could just decide what happened on my land, I realized this wasn't just about getting my driveway back. This was about making sure they understood exactly whose land they were standing on. I shook my head. Nah, I said slowly, a small smile creeping in despite myself. I've got a better idea. Deputy Collins raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried about that? I took another look at the wall, then down the stretch of dirt road that ran past it, the one they clearly thought belonged to them. Not if you like a good show, I said. And right then, the whole thing started to come together in my head. The thing about living out where I do, you get used to solving your own problems. You don't call someone every time something breaks. You figure it out. You improvise. You make do with what you've got. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, you let the problem sit just long enough for a better solution to show itself. And standing there that morning, staring at that wall like it had the nerve to belong there, I realized I'd been handed something better than a problem. I'd been handed leverage. See, what Cedar Hollow didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the stretch of dirt connecting my driveway to the main county road wasn't public anymore. Hadn't been for years. It used to be, way back, when Old Creek Road still showed up on maps and the county bothered maintaining it. But they abandoned it decades ago, stopped grading it, stopped claiming it, just let it fade into one of those forgotten strips of land nobody thinks about until suddenly it matters. 5 years before all this, I'd found out it was going up for auction. No fanfare, no big listing, just a quiet legal notice buried in county records. Most people wouldn't have looked twice. But I did. And I bought it. Cheap, too, because to anyone else, it was just a useless piece of dirt. To me, it was the only road in or out. And more importantly, it was mine. I never made a big deal about it. Didn't put up signs, didn't block it off. People from Cedar Hollow used it sometimes, mostly out of convenience, shaved a few minutes off their drive, instead of going the long way around. I didn't care. Figured as long as everyone was respectful, no harm done. But respect goes both ways. And the moment they laid that wall across my driveway, they burned through whatever goodwill I had left. So instead of tearing it down, I decided to let it stand. Just long enough for them to understand the mistake they'd made. First call I made after Collins left was to an old friend of mine, Luis. Guy's a welder, runs a small fabrication shop about 20 minutes out. Good hands, better instincts, and the kind of man who doesn't ask too many questions as long as the job makes sense. Jack, he said when he picked up, you sound like you've got trouble. Not trouble, I said, looking out at the wall again. Opportunity. He laughed. That usually means trouble. I need a gate, I said. Big one. How big? I paused, picturing it in my head, something they couldn't ignore, something that made a statement before anyone even got close enough to read a sign. 14 feet, I said. Tall, solid, the kind of thing you don't accidentally miss. There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a low whistle. All right, he said slowly. Now I'm interested. What are we building it for? I glanced down the road again, imagining Cedar Hollow waking up the next morning, thinking they still controlled how people moved in and out of their perfect little neighborhood. We're building it, I said, to remind some folks where their road actually is. Luis didn't ask anything else after that, just told me he'd be there by afternoon. The rest of that day moved fast. Faster than I expected, honestly. Word travels in small places, especially when something strange shows up overnight. By noon, I'd already had 2 neighbors from farther down the county road stop by, asking what the hell was going on. I gave them the short version, left out the part about the road being mine for now. No need to show all my cards at once. Luis rolled in around 2, trailer rattling behind his truck, welding gears strapped down tight. He took one look at the wall, let out a low chuckle, and shook his head. They really did this, he said, walking up to it, knocking his knuckles against the brick. Didn't even try to hide it. Guess they thought I'd just roll over, I said. He glanced back at me. You ever given anyone a reason to think that? I smiled a little. Not that I recall. We got to work setting the posts right where the wall ended, not on my driveway, not touching their precious bricks, just close enough that it felt connected. Close enough that anyone coming through would understand exactly what was happening. The gate itself went up by sunset. Steel frame, reinforced bars, solid hinges, and painted the brightest, most unapologetic neon green we could find. Luis kept laughing while we worked, said it looked like something out of a county fair, which was exactly the point. I didn't want subtle. I wanted impossible to ignore. Then came the signs. Private road, one red, bolted right into the center. No trespassing without authorization, said another. And the one I liked best. Toll access only. Luis stepped back when we finished, wiping his hands on his jeans, looking at the whole setup like an artist admiring a finished piece. Jack, he said, grinning, this is either genius, or it's going to get you in a whole lot of trouble. I leaned against the post, arms crossed, looking down the road toward Cedar Hollow. They already brought the trouble, I said. I'm just returning the favor. But I wasn't done yet. That night, just as the sun dipped low and the air started cooling off, I made another call, this time to a guy named Randy. Used to manage a small racetrack a couple counties over. Track shut down a few years back, but he kept a lot of the equipment, including an old toll booth that hadn't seen use in a long time. When I told him what I needed it for, he laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. You're serious? He said between breaths. You're actually putting up a toll booth? Dead serious, I said. He paused, then said, give me an hour. By the time he pulled in, it was dark. Headlights cutting across the trees, illuminating that neon gate like some kind of roadside attraction. The booth itself was beat up, a little rust along the edges, faded paint, but structurally sound. Functional. Perfect. We set it right in the middle of the road, not blocking it entirely, just enough that anyone driving through would have to stop, would have to acknowledge it, would have to deal with me. I spent the rest of the night getting everything ready. Printed out a fee schedule, laminated it, mounted it right beside the booth window. Kept it simple, clear, impossible to argue with. Residents, $250 per month. Guests, $10 per entry. HOA board members, $500 per month, non-negotiable. That last part, yeah, that was personal. By the time I finally got inside, it was pushing close to midnight. I was tired, sure, but there was something else sitting underneath it. Not anger, not exactly. More like anticipation. Because I knew what was coming. Cedar Hollow, they run like clockwork. Morning commutes, school drop-offs, gym runs, routines built on predictability. And I just inserted something unpredictable right in the middle of it. I woke up early the next morning, earlier than usual, and made my way out to the booth with a fresh cup of coffee, same as the day before. Only this time, I knew I wasn't the one about to be surprised. First car came through around 6:45. Black SUV, tinted windows, probably heading to work. It slowed as it approached the gate, hesitated, then rolled up to the booth, like maybe it was some kind of temporary construction thing. I stepped out, gave a small wave. Morning, I said. The driver rolled down the window, confusion written all over his face. What is this? He asked. Toll road, I said simply, gesturing to the sign. Private property. Fee schedule's right there. He stared at me for a second, then at the gate, then back at me. You're serious. Completely. Behind him, another car pulled up. Then another. Within minutes, a line started forming, engines idling, people craning their necks, trying to figure out what was happening. And just like that, the show had started. By 7:15, the line of cars stretched farther than I could see from the booth, just a slow crawl of brake lights and morning impatience, engines idling, people checking their watches like somehow time might start cooperating again if they stared at it hard enough. And I'll admit, standing there with my coffee, leaning against that little rusted toll booth, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not exactly satisfaction, not yet, but the beginning of it, like the first crack of thunder. Before a storm finally breaks. Most folks handled it about how you'd expect. Confusion first, then irritation, then that moment where it clicks that this isn't temporary, this isn't a mistake, this is something real they have to deal with. Some paid without much fuss, mostly the ones already running late, tossing a tin through the window, muttering under their breath as they rolled through. Others tried to argue, told me this was ridiculous, illegal, unbelievable. like saying the words loud enough might change the situation. I kept it simple every time. Same tone, same answer. Private road, I'd say, tapping the sign. You're welcome to use it, just not for free. Around 8 o'clock, things shifted. That's when he showed up. You can usually spot the person in charge before they even say a word. It's in how they move, how everyone else reacts when they arrive. Black sedan cut through the line, not even pretending to wait its turn, pulling right up to the front like rules were something that happened to other people. Doors swung open hard, and out stepped a man in a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to look approachable, though nothing about his face suggested he actually was. Daniel Mercer, president of Cedar Hollow's HOA, and the same man who'd stood at the edge of my driveway months back, explaining to me, real calmly, how my home was dragging down the value of everything around it. He didn't look confused. He looked offended. "What is this?" he demanded. Not even a greeting, just straight into it like the whole world had personally inconvenienced him. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. Let the moment stretch just a little. "Morning, Daniel," I said. "Nice of you to stop by." His jaw tightened at that, like hearing his first name out here didn't sit right with him. "You need to remove this immediately," he said, gesturing sharply at the gate, the booth, the line of cars behind him. "You're obstructing access to a private residential community." I set the cup down on the ledge of the booth, stepped a little closer, not aggressive, just enough that we were actually talking to each other, not past each other. "No," I said, calm as anything. "I'm regulating access to my road." He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Your road," he repeated. "This is a shared access point. It's been used by our residents for years." "Used," I said, nodding slightly. "Not owned." That hit him. Not fully, not yet, but enough that I could see the gears starting to turn. "You can't just decide to start charging people," he said, voice rising a notch. "That's not how this works." I reached over, grabbed the laminated sheet, and handed it to him. "That's exactly how it works," I said. "Fee schedule's right there." He looked down at it, eyes scanning, and I watched the exact moment he got to the last line. "HOA board members, $500 per month. Non-negotiable." His face changed. Not just angry now, something sharper, more personal. "This is harassment," he said, looking back up at me. "Targeted, deliberate harassment." I shrugged a little. "You built a wall across my driveway." "That wall," he started, then stopped himself, like he realized mid-sentence he might be stepping into something he didn't fully understand yet. "That installation was approved. On land you don't own," I said quietly. That did it. For a second, just a second, he didn't have anything to say. And in that pause, you could feel the shift. Not in the cars, not in the noise, but right there between us. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, voice lower now, controlled. "We have legal resources. We can escalate this." I nodded. "You should." Then I reached into the booth, pulled out a folder, and held it up just enough for him to see. Because I already did. Inside that folder, copies of the deed for Old Creek Road, stamped, recorded, clean as could be. Photos from the night they built that wall, time-stamped, clear as day, showing exactly where those bricks went up. A filed complaint for trespassing, already logged with the county. I didn't hand it to him, just let him see enough to understand. "You don't get to decide what happens on my property," I said. "Not anymore." Behind him, horns started going off, short, frustrated bursts, people late, people angry, people suddenly very aware that whatever was happening up here, it wasn't getting resolved quickly. Daniel glanced back at the line, then at the gate, then at me again, and for the first time since he stepped out of that car, he looked uncertain. "Open it," he said, quieter now. "We'll sort this out properly." I shook my head. "We are sorting it out." And then I stepped back, gestured lightly toward the booth window. $500 a month, I added, or you can take the long way around. Adds about 20 minutes, I hear. He stared at me for a long second, then turned, got back in his car, and sat there. Didn't move, didn't roll forward, didn't back up, just sat. And that was the moment everything broke open. Because people behind him started getting out of their cars. At first just a few, then more. Voices rising, questions flying, not at me, at him. "What's going on? Why are we being charged? Is this even legal?" And Daniel, for all his confidence, for all his control, didn't have a clean answer to give them. Not one he could say out loud without exposing exactly what they'd done. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end in a courtroom. It was going to end right there, inside their own community. That afternoon, I sent out letters. Every address in Cedar Hollow, printed, documented, clear. No insults, no threats, just facts. What they'd built, where they'd built it, what it cost, and what it would take to make it right. Remove the wall, issue a formal apology, cover the damages, and I'd consider removing the toll. I didn't have to wait long. A week later, the wall was gone. Not partially, not quietly, completely. Like it had never been there. 2 weeks after that, Daniel Mercer resigned. No big announcement, no explanation, just gone. And 3 weeks in, I got a check in the mail. Exact amount, down to the dollar. Covered the gate, the booth, the mess their construction crew left behind. Even the grass they tore up without asking. I stood there on my porch that evening, holding that envelope, looking out at the road, my road, and that bright green gate still standing where we'd put it. I never took it down. Not because I needed the money, and not even because I was still angry, but because sometimes a reminder matters more than a resolution. Now, here's the part one still think about, the part I'm not entirely sure how to feel about, even now. Some of the folks from Cedar Hollow, they started waving when they drove by. A few even stopped, apologized, said they had no idea what the board was doing, no clue their money was being used to build something like that. And I believe them. Most people just want to live their lives, keep things simple, trust that the folks in charge aren't making decisions that'll blow back on them. But then there were others, the ones who still looked at my place like it didn't belong, like I'd somehow cheated the system by not fitting into their version of what things should look like. And I guess that's where it gets complicated. Because yeah, I proved a point, but I also changed something. Not just for them, for me too. So I'll leave you with this. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Would you have torn the wall down and called it a day? Or would you have let it play out, made them feel it, made them understand? And more importantly, where's the line between standing your ground and going just a little too far? Let me know what you think, because I've heard both sides, and I'm still not sure there's a clean answer.